Peace and grace to you, beloved child of God. There are moments in life when someone walks away from you, not because they stopped caring, not because the connection was shallow, not because the love wasn't real, but because they did not yet have the capacity to stay. And when they walked away, you told yourself a story, a painful one, a story that said, they didn't value you, they didn't choose you, they didn't care enough, they didn't feel enough, they didn't fight enough. But today I need to speak to the deeper truth, the truth only your spirit has sensed, the truth your dreams have whispered, the truth your heart has felt even in the silence. They couldn't move on from you. They tried. They genuinely tried. With distractions, with new people, with work, with emotional shutdown, with pretending, with numbing, with every coping mechanism they knew how to use. But the heart cannot outrun what the soul recognizes. And their soul recognizes you. This message is not for everyone. This is for the one who has been feeling emotional echoes, for the one who has been waking up with a heaviness they cannot explain, for the one who has been sensing someone pulling on their spirit, for the one who has been experiencing sudden waves of sadness, or longing, or tenderness that seem to come out of nowhere. You are not imagining it. You are not overthinking. You are not making it up. There is someone who has been tied to your spirit, someone who walked away, someone who tried to move on, someone who convinced themselves they could replace the connection. But the truth caught up with them, and it broke them. They are realizing something now, something heavy, something painful, something they never wanted to face. They let go of the one person who saw them clearly, the one person who loved them gently, the one person who spoke to the real version of them, the one person who prayed for them, the one person who held space for their healing, the one person who believed in them before they believed in themselves. And that realization is hitting them harder than they ever expected. They are waking up to what they lost. They are waking up to what they ignored. They are waking up to what they took lightly. They are waking up to the depth you carried, the loyalty you offered, the safety you provided, the softness you shared, the wisdom you carried, the spiritual covering you brought into their life. They didn't know how rare your heart was, not until they tried to live without it. And today we are going to go deep. We are going to talk about the 7 reasons they couldn't move on from you. We are going to explore what broke inside them, what awakened inside them, what their spirit is wrestling with, and what their heart is now finally admitting. These 7 points will not just give you clarity. They will give you peace, strength, understanding, and a deeper sense of your own value. But before we go deeper, if this introduction is already activating something inside you, if you feel this message finding the exact place in your heart that has been waiting for truth, if your spirit is saying, "This is for me," then pause for a moment and make sure you subscribe to Daily Motivation Prayers. This channel is where I bring you clarity, where I break down the emotional and spiritual truths behind love, where I speak to things most people are afraid to confront, where I help you understand the deeper reasons behind connection, detachment, distance, and divine timing. And I promise you, by the end of this video, you will not only understand why they couldn't move on, you will understand why you couldn't forget, why the bond stayed alive, why the energy never faded, why your intuition kept signaling there was more to the story. Stay with me. Take a breath. Open your heart. Because what I'm about to share with you in number 1 will reveal the truth behind why they tried to walk away and why their soul wouldn't let them. Number 1, they couldn't move on because their soul never released you. There is a difference between a person walking away and a soul letting go. The body can leave. The mind can disconnect. The ego can pretend it doesn't care. But the soul holds truth. The soul holds memory. The soul holds recognition. The soul holds the essence of what God joins before the mind understands why. This is why they couldn't move on from you. Their soul never released you. Their physical self may have walked in a different direction, but the part of them that is anchored to truth, the part of them that feels beyond logic, the part of them that sees beyond the surface, the part of them that knows what is real, that part never left. People can detach from what is superficial. They can detach from what is transactional. They can detach from what is convenient. But they cannot detach from what is spiritually familiar. They cannot detach from a soul imprint. They cannot detach from a divine mark. They cannot detach from someone who awakened something inside them they didn't even know existed. This is why the connection stayed alive inside them. Even when they tried to bury it with distractions, even when they tried to numb it with busyness, even when they tried to drown it in silence, even when they tried to force themselves to move forward, it stayed, it pulsed, it whispered, it kept resurfacing, it kept calling them back to the truth, because their soul recognized you long before their mind admitted it. And when the soul recognizes someone, there is no running, only circling, only returning, only wrestling, only awakening. This is why they felt conflicted, a split between what they wanted, what they feared, and what they sensed. Part of them wanted you deeply, but another part feared the level of vulnerability that came with you. Part of them longed for the safety you offered, but another part questioned whether they deserved it. Part of them felt seen by you, but another part didn't know how to handle that kind of intimacy. Part of them wanted to stay, but another part did not feel ready to be loved on the level where healing would be required. You didn't ask too much. You triggered their growth. You activated parts of them they had been avoiding. You touched wounds they spent years ignoring. You challenged emotional walls they had built to survive. You confronted their fear of being known. You shattered their illusion that they could keep living on the surface where nothing real touches them. And instead of facing all of that, they ran. They withdrew. They went silent. They distanced themselves, not because they didn't care, but because they cared too deeply. And deep love feels dangerous to someone who has never felt safe. You weren't the threat. Your depth was. Your clarity was. Your softness was. Your purity was. Your honesty was. Your emotional presence was. These things felt foreign to them. And when something feels foreign, people often step away not because it's wrong, but because they don't yet know how to hold it. But even as they stepped away, something inside them stayed connected. Something in their heart refused to release you. Something in their spirit stayed tied to you. Something in their dreams kept pulling you back into their awareness. Something in their emotions kept resurfacing when they least expected it. This is why they couldn't move on. Your presence marked them. Your love softened them. Your truth awakened them. Your patience revealed their walls. Your loyalty exposed their fears. Your consistency broke their patterns. Your spirit recognized theirs. And their soul has been wrestling with that ever since. They thought the connection would fade if they distanced themselves. But distance only amplified what they felt. They thought time would numb the bond. But time only made it clearer. They thought silence would disconnect them. But silence only made their longing louder. You weren't just another chapter. You were the revelation. You weren't just another person. You were the mirror. You weren't just another experience. You were the awakening. And that's why they couldn't move on. The soul doesn't release what God used to transform it. Number 2, they couldn't move on because you revealed a version of themselves they didn't know existed. There are people who enter your life and nothing in you changes. And then there are people who enter your life, and suddenly the way you see yourself, the way you think, the way you feel, the way you move, the way you love, the way you hope, everything shifts. You were that person for them. You awaken a version of themselves they didn't even know lived inside them. A deeper self, a more tender self, a more vulnerable self, a more honest self, a more connected self, a more spiritual self, a more intuitive self, a more open self. You pulled truth out of them. Truth they had kept buried. Truth they had ignored. Truth they had never confronted. Truth they didn't feel safe enough to share with anyone else. And once someone experiences themselves at a deeper level with you, it becomes impossible to go back to a shallower version of life with someone else. This is why they couldn't move on. Not because you made them dependent, but because you made them aware. And awareness is permanent. You awaken emotions they thought they were too broken to feel. You activated hope they thought was long gone. You stirred up dreams they abandoned. You made them imagine a future they didn't think they were worthy of. You made them soften in places they had kept hard for years. You made them feel seen in ways that scared them, not because it hurt, but because it healed. And healing can be terrifying, especially for someone who built their identity around survival, around self-protection, around emotional detachment. You didn't just love them. You reflected them. You mirrored their potential. You showed them who they could be, who they were created to be, who God was calling them to become. You saw their strength beneath the fear. You saw their tenderness beneath the hardness. You saw their wisdom beneath the confusion. You saw their purity beneath the pain. You saw their purpose beneath the mistakes. And nothing is more powerful than being seen like that. You didn't just hold space for them. You held truth for them. You held grace for them. You held compassion for them. You held vision for them. You saw the healed version of them even when they were still living in the wounded one. And that did something to them. Something deep. Something spiritual. Something irreversible. They realized you didn't just understand their heart. You understood their calling. You didn't just connect with their personality. You connected with their soul. You didn't just love their potential. You loved their scars. You didn't just make them feel good. You made them feel safe. And safety is rare. Safety is sacred. Safety is unforgettable. This is why they couldn't move on. Not because they were weak, but because a connection forced them to confront themselves. And you cannot unsee yourself once someone has shown you who you really are. You made them feel alive in a way that scared them, because aliveness demands responsibility. Aliveness demands honesty. Aliveness demands choice. Aliveness demands presence. Aliveness demands vulnerability. You didn't introduce chaos into their life. You introduced clarity. And clarity is uncomfortable for someone who's been surviving on confusion. You didn't make life harder for them. You made truth unavoidable. And unavoidable truth is often the beginning of transformation. When they try to move on, they discovered something they didn't expect. It wasn't you they were running from. It was a version of themselves you awakened. The version that required growth. The version that required accountability. The version that required healing. The version that required courage. They couldn't move on because they couldn't return to who they were before they met you. And they couldn't destroy the part of themselves you activated, because once the soul wakes up, it cannot go back to sleep. You change them, not with pressure, but with presence, not with demands, but with depth, not with control, but with sincerity. You taught them something. They now understand. The person who awakens your soul is not easily forgotten, not easily replaced, not easily released. And that's why moving on wasn't possible for them, because they weren't just leaving you. They were leaving the best version of themselves. And that's the part their heart refused to surrender. Number 3, they couldn't move on because your absence exposed what their life was missing. There are people who don't understand what you bring into their life. Not while you're there, not while you're giving, not while you're showing up, not while you're pouring into them, not while you're praying for them, not while you're supporting them in ways they never asked for but desperately needed. Some people only understand your presence through the shock of your absence, and that is exactly what happened to them. When you stepped back, when communication slowed, when your energy pulled away, when your heart stopped reaching out, when your spirit stopped pouring into theirs, something inside them began to unravel, because you were not just a person in their life. You were the stability they didn't know they depended on. You were the softness they didn't know they needed. You were the peace they didn't know they relied on. You were the grounding they didn't realize kept them centered. You were the emotional warmth they thought they had within themselves. You were the clarity they thought they understood alone. But when you withdrew, even silently, even respectfully, even without anger, they felt the shift instantly. They felt the cold. They felt the quiet. They felt the emptiness. They felt the heaviness. They felt the gap. They felt the missing piece. They felt the truth. Your absence exposed what their life looked like without you, and it was not something they were prepared to face. They realized how much lighter they felt when you were around. They realized how their anxiety softened in your presence. They realized how their confidence grew when you affirmed them. They realized how their heart felt safe when you spoke life into them. They realized how their spirit felt grounded when you prayed for them. They realized how their emotions stabilized when your voice reached them. Your presence was healing, even when you didn't know it, even when they didn't admit it, even when they pretended it wasn't affecting them. But the moment you stepped back, their spirit felt the withdrawal of something holy, something rare, something irreplaceable. This is why they couldn't move on, because the void you left was not a normal void. It wasn't just the absence of a person. It was the absence of peace, of grounding, of emotional safety, of spiritual covering, of clarity, of direction, of genuine connection. Your absence revealed the difference between you and everyone else. No one else matched your presence. No one else carried your light. No one else held space the way you did. No one else had the emotional or spiritual maturity you had. No one else saw them the way you did. So they tried to distract themselves with work, with routine, with people, with entertainment, with noise, with anything to avoid feeling what was rising inside them. But distraction doesn't heal. It only delays. And every delay made the truth louder. You were not optional. You were essential, not in a dependent way, but in a spiritually aligned way. Your presence carried purpose. Your presence carried comfort. Your presence carried truth. Your presence carried love. Your presence carried revelation. They couldn't move on because losing you didn't feel like losing a person. It felt like losing a direction, losing a rhythm, losing a sense of home, losing alignment, losing emotional grounding. And here's the truth that breaks through everything. Their life without you made them confront their emptiness. The emptiness you once helped them navigate. The emptiness you once helped soothe. The emptiness you once helped fill with hope and clarity. When you stepped back, that emptiness returned. Stronger, heavier, more undeniable than before. Because now they knew what it felt like to have support, to have softness, to have understanding, to have consistency, to have someone who cared from a pure place. And once the soul experiences that, it cannot settle for anything less. And that's why they couldn't move on. Your absence didn't just remind them of you. It reminded them of who they were becoming around you and who they are without you. That contrast is what broke them. That contrast is what awakened them. That contrast is what made moving on impossible. Your absence was the mirror, the wake-up call, the revelation, and it changed everything. Number 4, they couldn't move on because you were the only person who loved them without conditions. There's a kind of love that is rare in this world. A love that doesn't come with requirements. A love that doesn't demand perfection. A love that doesn't punish mistakes. A love that doesn't manipulate. A love that doesn't compete. A love that doesn't perform. A love that doesn't negotiate affection. You gave them that kind of love. A love without conditions. A love without pressure. A love without control. You loved them in a way they weren't used to being loved. You loved them in a way they never experienced before. You loved them from a pure place, not because you wanted something from them, but because your heart was aligned with theirs. And that kind of love is unforgettable, unshakable, unreplaceable. They couldn't move on because your love did something to them, something deep, something spiritual, something sacred. Your love spoke to the places inside them that had been abandoned. Your love reached the wounds no one else cared enough to tend to. Your love softened the walls they built to survive. Your love reminded them of their humanity. Your love gave them permission to hope. Your love made them feel worthy even when they didn't believe it. You loved them through understanding, not judgment, through grace, not criticism, through patience, not pressure. And that kind of love creates transformation, even if the person isn't ready to accept it, even if the person feels unworthy of it, even if the person tries to run from it. They couldn't move on because your love was not just emotional. It was spiritual. It was healing. It was restorative. You didn't love them blindly. You loved them deeply. You saw their flaws, their fears, their insecurities, their brokenness, and you didn't turn away. You didn't use it against them. You didn't punish them for their wounds. You didn't demand they be whole before you cared. You showed them what unconditional love feels like, and that terrified them, because unconditional love exposes every conditional love that came before it. They realized something heavy, something painful, something they didn't want to admit. They had never been loved like that, not by family, not by partners, not by friends, not by anyone. Your love was the first safe place they ever experienced. And safety is intoxicating. Safety is grounding. Safety is unforgettable. They couldn't move on because everywhere they went, every connection they tried to build, every person they attempted to date, every distraction they tried to create, none of it felt like you. No one listened like you. No one understood like you. No one cared like you. No one prayed for them like you. No one saw their soul like you. No one held space for them like you. No one loved with the same capacity you loved with. You didn't love them to change them, but your love changed them anyway. You didn't love them to fix them, but your love helped them confront what was broken. You didn't love them because they earned it, but because you were aligned with who they were becoming. And that is the kind of love that leaves a permanent imprint, a mark on the heart, a memory that can't fade, a truth they cannot outrun. They tried to move on, but every new connection exposed the difference between being wanted and being loved, between being chosen temporarily and being valued deeply, between being seen on the surface and being understood at the core. Your love taught them what love is, and everything after you felt shallow, incomplete, empty, surface level. You didn't love them perfectly, but you loved them purely, and pure love is unforgettable. They couldn't move on because your love is still echoing in their spirit, still shaping them, still awakening them, still calling them to a higher version of themselves. And here's the truth that breaks the heart. They are realizing now, only after losing you, that what you gave them was something they may never find again, not because it doesn't exist, but because it was uniquely yours, uniquely crafted, uniquely expressed, uniquely aligned. They couldn't move on because unconditional love leaves a permanent mark, and your love marked them more deeply than they ever expected. Number 5, they couldn't move on because you were the only person who challenged their healing. There is a difference between someone who entertains your wounds and someone who challenges them. A difference between someone who accepts your broken patterns and someone who gently confronts them. A difference between someone who keeps you comfortable in dysfunction and someone who pushes you toward the version of yourself God intended. You were the challenger, not in an aggressive way, not in a forceful way, not in a controlling way, but in a truthful way, a grounded way, a spiritually aligned way. You brought light into places they were used to keeping dark. You brought honesty to areas they never examined. You brought emotional clarity where they lived in confusion. You brought responsibility into their life where they once lived in avoidance. This is why they couldn't move on, because you were not just a romantic connection. You were a catalyst, a turning point, a mirror, a divine interruption. You saw the patterns that held them back, the fear that shaped their decisions, the trauma that shaped their reactions, the insecurity that shaped their silence, the avoidance that shaped their detachment. And instead of judging them, you called them higher. You called them to growth. You called them into emotional maturity. You called them into accountability. You called them into truth. And no one had ever done that for them before. They were used to people who accepted their excuses, who enabled their avoidance, who tolerated their unhealed behaviors, who danced around their wounds, who let them stay emotionally asleep. But you were different. You awakened something ancient in them, something sacred, something powerful. You challenged a version of themselves that kept sabotaging their life, and they didn't know what to do with that. You didn't challenge them from a place of ego. You challenged them from a place of vision. You saw who they could be, not just who they were. And that vision convicted them. That vision shook them. That vision forced them to confront their own avoidance. You asked questions no one else asked. You noticed things no one else noticed. You held them accountable in ways they were not prepared for. You highlighted emotional blind spots they had been ignoring for years, not because you were demanding, but because you cared, deeply, honestly, purely. Your presence required growth. Your love required honesty. Your connection required vulnerability. And they were not ready. Not then, not emotionally, not spiritually. So instead of rising to the calling, they ran from it, because running felt easier than growing. Running felt safer than changing. Running felt familiar. Growth did not. But even as they ran, even as they pulled back, even as they tried to distance themselves, your voice stayed with them. Your influence stayed with them. Your truth stayed with them. Every time they made a decision, they heard the wisdom you once spoke. Every time they repeated an old pattern, they remembered the discomfort you lovingly confronted. Every time they avoided vulnerability, they remembered the safety you offered when they opened up. You became the measure, not by force, but by impact. You didn't try to fix them. You didn't try to parent them. You didn't try to control them. You simply held a higher standard, a healthier standard, a healing standard. And once someone experiences a connection that calls them to their higher self, they cannot pretend it didn't exist. They cannot move on easily. They cannot fully go back to the old version of themselves, because your presence changed them. Your truth shaped them. Your emotional intelligence awakened theirs. Your spiritual alignment exposed their lack of alignment. This is why they couldn't move on, because every shallow connection after you felt meaningless. Every surface-level flirtation felt empty. Every emotionally unavailable person felt draining. Every situation that lacked depth felt lifeless. You raised their standard, not by telling them what to do, but By showing them what was possible, you didn't make them feel inadequate. You made them realize they were meant for more. More healing, more honesty, more connection, more growth, more emotional presence, more maturity. And once a person realizes they were made for more, they cannot settle for less. They cannot regress. They cannot pretend. They cannot truly walk away. You were not just someone they loved. You were someone who awakened them. You were someone who stretched them. You were someone who confronted what they had been avoiding. And because of that, they could leave your presence. But they could not leave your influence. You were the turning point in their healing journey. And that is why moving on was impossible. Number 6, they couldn't move on because you were the first person who saw their pain and didn't run. There is a kind of pain people carry that is invisible, a pain they learn to hide, a pain they learn to smile through, a pain they learned to pretend wasn't there, a pain they buried so deeply that even they stopped acknowledging it. But you saw it, you felt it, you recognized it, not because they told you, not because they explained it, not because they opened up immediately, but because your spirit was sensitive, your heart was discerning, your intuition was sharp, and your love was pure. You saw the sadness behind their strength. You saw the fear behind their confidence. You saw the wounds behind their silence. You saw the abandonment behind their emotional distance. You saw the longing behind their withdrawal. You saw the insecurity behind their pride. And instead of running, instead of judging, instead of pushing them to be someone they were not, you stayed. You listened. You cared. You understood. You gave them space without disappearing. You gave them love without forcing intimacy. You gave them support without controlling them. And that alone changed everything for them. Because most people in their life had treated their pain like an inconvenience. Too heavy, too complicated, too emotional, too much work, too messy. But you didn't. You met their pain with compassion. You met their confusion with presence. You met their triggers with patience. You met their emotional shutdown with understanding. You were the first person who saw the hurting child inside the adult, the first person who noticed the emotional bruises, the first person who heard the silent cries, the first person who recognized when their heart started to close, the first person who didn't punish them for their trauma responses. And that level of emotional safety is rare. Rare in friendships, rare in relationships, rare in human connection. They couldn't move on because no one else made their pain feel seen. No one else made their trauma feel safe. No one else made their emotions feel valid. No one else sat with their darkness without fear. You made them feel like their pain had a place, not to live, but to heal. They didn't have to perform. They didn't have to pretend. They didn't have to hide. They didn't have to armor up. They could soften with you. They could breathe with you. They could open up with you, even if just for moments. Those moments were enough to change them, because once someone experiences safety, all the unsafe connections after that feel unbearable. When they walked away, they thought they could handle life on their own. They thought they didn't need support. They thought they didn't need emotional depth. They thought their old coping mechanisms would still work. But the moment you left, the pain got louder. The emptiness got heavier. The silence got sharper. The memories got clearer. Your presence made their pain feel less frightening. Your absence made their pain feel overwhelming. They realized something they never wanted to admit. You were the only person who truly understood them. Not on the surface, not through words, but through spirit. You read their energy. You felt their emotional shifts. You noticed their tone changes. You caught their avoidance. You sensed their withdrawal. You saw through their walls. And instead of reacting, you responded with grace. You didn't take their distance personally. You didn't take their silence as rejection. You didn't take their inconsistency as a lack of care. You understood it was pain. Pain they didn't choose. Pain they didn't know how to communicate. Pain they didn't know how to process. You were the first person who didn't misinterpret their wounds. You were the first person who didn't weaponize their vulnerability. You were the first person who didn't shame them for struggling. And that stays with a person. That reshapes them. That humbles them. That awakens them. You were not just a safe place. You were a healing place, a reflective place, a grounding place. And when you stepped back, they felt exposed, because without you, they had to face themselves without support, without understanding, without compassion. Every connection after you felt emotionally unavailable, because they had never met someone whose heart was as open as yours. They couldn't move on because their soul knew what you gave them was not normal, not replaceable, not duplicable. And losing that kind of emotional sanctuary leaves a wound that echoes, a wound that lingers, a wound that wakes them up at night, a wound that reminds them of the one person who stayed when everyone else walked away. And emotional truth like that is impossible to outrun. Number 7, they try to replace you, but every connection after you fell hollow. There comes a moment in a person's life when they finally understand the difference between attention and connection, between company and comfort, between desire and alignment, between someone who likes them and someone who understands their soul. They reach that moment because of you. After you stepped out of their life, they tried to fill the space. They tried to distract themselves. They tried to use old habits. They tried to go back to the version of themselves they were before they met you. But nothing worked, because once a soul touches real depth, nothing shallow feels safe anymore. Every person they met after you fell off, not wrong, just empty, just surface level, just disconnected in a way they could not ignore. No matter how hard they tried to pretend, they did not feel the difference. They compared every new face to the way you made them feel, without meaning to. The comfort you brought, the calm you carried, the understanding in your silence, the softness in your presence, the emotional safety you created without trying. They tried to replace you with people who were easier, people who demanded less, people who did not challenge their healing, people who fit the version of themselves they used to be. But every attempt fell flat, because none of those people knew how to read their moods. None of them noticed a shift in their energy. None of them sensed their internal storms. None of them heard the words they weren't saying. None of them held space for their heart the way you did. You were not loud in your care. You were gentle, attentive, patient, present. You noticed the tiny changes, the hesitation in their voice, the heaviness in their shoulders, the silence that meant pain, the jokes that covered fear, the smiles that hid exhaustion. And you responded with empathy instead of questions. You saw their truth without demanding confessions. You loved them in a language they did not know they needed. That is why nothing after you felt right. They dated people who looked good on paper, people who were convenient, people who seemed stable, people who said the right things, people who fit their old patterns. But every time their heart attempted to open, it collapsed back into itself. Not because the other person was wrong, because the connection had no depth, no gravity, no soul recognition. It felt like eating without tasting, breathing without relief, talking without being heard. And they could not explain why. They could not explain why no one felt like home. They could not explain why simple conversations felt exhausting. They could not explain why their heart kept comparing connection to memory. They could not explain why their mind kept replaying moments with you. Their soul did explain it. Your connection activated a part of them they did not know existed, a part of them they cannot shut down, a part of them that wakes up when they think of you. You were the only person who matched their inner world instead of only their outer world, the only person who connected to their silence, the only person who could feel their pain without needing details, the only person who made them feel emotionally understood instead of emotionally exposed. And now they understand something they once tried to ignore. They were not just attached to you. They were aligned with you. That is why replacements failed. That is why distractions failed. That is why pretending failed. That is why moving on never worked. Because you were not a chapter. You were a shift, a turning point, a mirror, a healing space, a soul recognition. And the soul never forgets the one who saw it clearly. In every soul-level connection, there comes a moment of realization, a moment when the truth they tried to bury rises louder than their fear. A moment when every distraction falls apart. A moment when every attempt to replace what was real feels hollow. That is the season they are walking through now. They have tried to move forward without you. They have tried to numb the memories. They have tried to silence the feelings. They have tried to convince themselves that what you two shared was not as deep as it felt. But the heart always knows when it has met something real, and their heart has not stopped reminding them. You were not just a comforting presence. You were a shift in their spirit. You were the one who understood the parts of them they never showed. You were the one who listened without judging. You were the one who stayed present even when they shut down. You were the one who saw their pain and did not run. And that kind of connection does not disappear just because someone walks away. They are now feeling the weight of everything they tried to ignore. The emotional echoes, the spiritual pull, the unfinished truth, the unspoken feelings. Every part of them is being pushed into honesty, not because of pressure from you, but because their spirit can no longer handle the separation. What they feel for you has survived silence. It has survived distance. It has survived confusion. It has survived fear. It has survived the attempts to replace you. And anything that survives that much resistance is not accidental. They are realizing you were not just a person who entered their life. You were a mirror, a healer, a companion, a safe place, a turning point. You were the experience that awakened a part of them that longed for real emotional connection. And now that part refuses to go back to sleep. Their soul is tired of pretending. Their heart is tired of running. Their mind is tired of denying. They can no longer hide from what they know. And what they know is that you mattered in a way no one else ever has. This is why the next phase of their journey is not about avoidance. It is about clarity. It is about accountability. It is about honesty. It is about returning to the truth they try to outrun. Because no matter where they went, no matter who they met, no matter how hard they tried to start over, everything kept leading them back to you. And now the connection is entering its most important stage, the stage where fear breaks, where truth rises, where the soul speaks louder than the ego, where both of you are being aligned for a chapter that is deeper, clearer, and more grounded than anything that came before. If this touched your spirit, and you want the next part of this journey delivered to you with the same depth and clarity, make sure you subscribe. I do not want you to miss the revelations, confirmations, and guidance that are coming next. Your story is not finished. Your alignment is rising. And the next message might be the one you've been waiting for. Amen.